We're now moving on to dynamic, and it doesn't seem like it's doing that much. It just loads in 3 posts. Go back to top. But if we go to F12, what we'll see, and if we go to the network tab, and if we refresh the page and look at all, clear, and click this, we will see that everything's being loaded in, and a lot of these are the images in here. If we refresh the page again and just go to our XHR requests, that's what we see initially here. Let's refresh the page. That will come in here. When we click on this, we can see we're now loading in these JavaScript files. And if we have a look at the code in the VS Code, if we come down now to dynamic and open this up and go into dynamic HTML, what we can see is when we've got a button on the page, when we click on that, we load the script and then we create our HTML using a little function here that will create our web component. We're basically adding on a custom tag. We're adding on the custom HTML tag and the ID, so that when we're in here, if we now click and inspect and go into elements, we will see that these here, let's just close this one, let's take this one down. We will see that now we've added on 3 of these show post web components which weren't there originally. If we come back in here and have a look and go into main, it's not there. When we click on it, we can suddenly see that that div was being activated, and we've actually added dynamically those tag elements. So this can be useful for performance, that basically you can load in your web components, add them dynamically to the page, basically just adding DOM elements and removing them as you wish. So we can also now go to the blog, and this is just a slightly different style. We can click on each of these. If we have a look at the code in blog, you can see we've got a number here of different components. We've got the index main index file that basically is getting the posts, fetching them, and I put a lot of comments in here for when you go through them, but we're actually referencing on the page. If we look at index.html, I've actually kind of split them into 2 components. Now I did say before, design pattern where both of them are interacting is not, they should go through a parent. I'm doing this for demonstration purposes, and it's also worth noting that these scripts should really have type equals module if they're sort of importing other scripts rather than just having the plain script. So here, for example, all posts could be positioned anywhere on the page, and we could like separate this up if we wanted to move the 2 around. But all we're really doing is updating the status here. So what we're doing, this is for the offline event, that's for something later on. Here we have the 2 posts, and when we have a look here, post lists, it's again roughly the same thing. It's just working through and appending buttons for each of the post selected posts, and the post detail, when it gets it, it displays it. The difference being here in index, what we're actually using is we're actually using setters and getters, because we're putting the post list component dot all posts. So if we go to the post list component, basically what we can actually do is we've got getters and setters here. So we're not using attributes. What we're doing is when we actually list the buttons, we've actually got functions where we can then set on the detail the actual value that we want. And we can see here we're dispatching an event. It's a fairly bit of involved. Took me a little while to really understand what was going on with this, but that's how we can make this particular page where we're actually kind of creating buttons, and when we click on them, it's basically using setters and getters to update a different component. And if we just have a quick look again at the post detail, we can see that actually when we can set a post value, we can set the value here, and then we call the render. So we're just re-rendering that particular component on the side, and that's being called from post list. It gets an access to the page, and basically then appends the buttons with the links, and so then when it has a getter and a setter, it basically just changes the values. So I'm not going to go into the complexity of that. One can work sort of through that, but that's basically how we can use a kind of blog version. Next is a login, and actually this is just basically this whole component here has a lot of validations, and this is where, for example, I have used up top here in the global, I've put out all these sort of UI classes of formatting, because if we notice here, what we're actually doing is as we're typing, we're getting what so do, but it waits 750 milliseconds. So if I keep typing like this bit up here doesn't change, but once I pause, it will run a check. So just a sort of UI feature. And so if we actually enter in, and if you notice how it's getting icons and stuff coming up, that's just to show you that this whole thing can be a complex. Now it's checked that both things, this button's become active. And if we come in here and do console and we click login, it's going off, comes back with a JSON web token from a server. Notice a custom event is fired. I put that in because if we are in this one called authenticate, this would be a way that the page controller could know that the login is successful or not successful, then either hide the component or move or redirect. So here, for example, with this this is now our login component, all of this. When it's done, it emits a result, which other components or the parent component can then respond to. Next, we'll move on to lazy and offline. We've had about 7 minutes of this, so we will close this video down and we'll then move into the next video.